Hey, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Found Friday. I'm your host, Erin Atchison, joined by co-host Ray Griesel-Huber. Today, we are joined by Bill Cushard from Service Rocket out in Palo Alto, and we are excited to have you join us for today's topic, which is creating content the Agile marketing way. So, Bill, give everybody a minute to, talk a little bit about what it is that you do and why you are excited about doing this topic with us today.
Hi, everyone. I'm so honored to be here. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Ray. I'm Bill Cushard. I have a marketing title. I'm a director of marketing for a company called Service Rocket, and we're in the business of software adoption. We help companies get the most out of the software that they buy, and we do that with training, with implementations, and support. And one of the software products we do a lot of work in is the Atlassian product suite. So Jira and Confluence and Bamboo and Bitbucket, and they have a whole bunch of products. And so as a marketing team, we use Jira to track all of our work. So some teams might use sticky notes, some might use Trello and Asana and all that, whatever they use. We just happen to use Jira. And so I wrote a book on it because I wanted to on agile marketing and tracking your work and process of work because it's hard, and there's lots of books on it, but all the other books talk about why and what, and I wanted to do how.
Yeah.
Since our business is kind of how, so I figured, well, let's explain how. That's it.
Well, that's going to be exciting for today for sure, because a lot of what we talk about on episodes, and not just episodes, but really when we're talking with prospective users of our software, right, of any kind of software, of any kind of, implementation of something, is that workflow element. And Ray, I know you and I have talked about this so often, which is a lot of times platforms and tools will be a great tool, but there's not a great workflow. And so if you don't have these kind of steps for usage, things fall flat because people get in there and they feel overwhelmed, or they have a couple of missteps, or they're worried they're going to break something, or they can't find it. And then you don't end up with that adoption that you need from the get-go.
Yeah, actually, Bill, based on what you said in your introduction, actually, it prompted a bunch of questions for me that I'd love to dig into. We'll try to stay on track, of course. But I love the business that you guys are in, because this is such a huge problem for so many different types of companies. I think SaaS in particular, especially when you have companies that are more on the higher ticket item side of things, or they're trying to upsell their customers, getting that customer engagement and getting people to be really sticky inside the platform. It's literally the most important thing they could be doing in their business. So it's really cool to hear. Are you guys set up as a SaaS company yourself, or is it a consulting company, or sort of a hybrid?
Well, that's a good question. It's a hybrid. So
Okay.
our history is services, but because we're in software adoption, integrations and software products are also part of that. So just in one example, we make software that connects different software. So Salesforce and Jira, for example. Sales people are in Salesforce, engineers and product people and software developers are in Jira, but they're not in each other's systems. So if you can connect those two, these teams can communicate and bring the customers and what they're saying with developers building the things for customers together.
Okay.
Right. And so that's just one example of, so it's mostly services, but we do have lots of software products as well.
No, you're touching on some of my favorite topics. So I think that when it comes to SaaS, I think that SaaS in general, most SaaS companies, the way of the future for a lot of these companies to really get to scale is going to be embracing a lot more services in their operations.
And
I
would say even the software companies that are so-called design focused, and they're such good designers that no one would ever possibly need help learning the software. And of course, that's almost never the case.
No, absolutely. Well, that's great. I'll definitely have to dig more into what you guys do. I love what I've heard already. It sounds really, really great.
And it's one of the things that I think is interesting about what you guys are doing is that you are external to kind of the traditional onboarding that a company would do with a software platform, right? So if you join like a Marketo or a HubSpot or a Salesforce, there's a mandatory onboarding and training course but it may not talk to you about integrations you could do with other platforms or other ways that you could really be leveraging the software, or it may not necessarily be tailored to your team. And I think a lot of times what we talk about is there's kind of twofold parts of this, which is creating that stickiness factor that's product related, whether it's, alerts and notifications that keep you coming back to the dashboard or dialing in for more information, or it's, regular email notifications of important facts or figures, or some other kind of, integration with an email platform that actually is kind of sticky for you. I know HubSpot did a really great job with that, in kind of creating email plugins and things. So did Calendly, and they kind of start out with that free tool. But ramping people up to implementing it further than that into their workflow and becoming not just kind of a casual user, but a deeper user of a platform is really important. I want to talk to people about, because we're talking about creating content using some of these agile marketing methodologies, as this really hits home for us because this is what we talk about all the time. This is what our Get Found workflow is based on. This is what kind of the core of us talking a lot about marketing as an ecosystem in terms of, once we gather this information and data from organic, we want to make sure that we leverage that for better email, for better social, for better paid decisions, and really tying everything together and not leaving things kind of in these individual silos. So talk a little bit about what this content, the agile marketing way, means to you.
Well, it tries to combat the gravity that we have a lot, where a lot of us marketing people, myself included, come into work on Friday, and after my first coffee, I say, "Oh, we have to get out a newsletter today." It's sort of like an afterthought, and it's the most embarrassing thing in the world because, part of your job is to get that out. And if we were to operate like a real company, we probably would have had it all mapped out 3 weeks ahead and planned, and the headlines written and concepts and whatever. So the primary reason for that, I think, is that there's no process. A lot of us marketing people, we just come into work and work hard, and maybe we react too much, and so that's our problem too. But we don't really have a process. Agile is a process. Actually, Agile is more of a belief system. I read about this in the book. Agile by itself means nothing. It's just a belief system. There are specific methodologies that are Agile methodologies that are process oriented, and that's where the real work happens. And that's why I wrote sort of the how to do that, because there's no how to Agile. And because we have no process, we just come in, react, and work hard. And maybe we're good at it, and that's fine, and we get campaigns running and we get content out. But the fact that a marketing team could now have predictable content production, and we know what's coming and when it's coming, and we plan out our weeks, and we know exactly what we're going to do during a week. And maybe the best part about the Agile methodology, or some of them, is that you now, with a process like that, you have the ability to tell people no, and why you're telling them no, because you've already planned out a sprint, for example, which I guess we could talk about. That's sort of a buzzword, but you not only have a predictable process, so you know what you're doing, but also you can tell others, go away. Or if you can't tell them to go away, you can accept the request from the CEO, the urgent, this has to go out in an hour. You can go back to the team and say, we have this urgent request. What are we going to swap out? You have to have that conversation too. We're not just going to add, we're going to go back and be smart. It's a miracle. We can try to be smart, and we can say no.
You'll see that this will probably touch on some really fun stuff between Ray and I, because as COO and head of marketing here and CEO of the company, we have plenty of those moments, right? And I was going to say that what I'd love to dig into about the Agile approach is exactly that, which is, and it may not always be CEO related. Here it typically is. Thanks, Ray. But a lot of times it's, and you need that. Like what happens is, there's no good time to have a good idea, right? And so it's not like you're like, hey, all good ideas will happen on Monday morning so that we can, or Friday afternoon, so we can plan next week's sprint around my good ideas, or whatever the situation is. Or, hey, I need to plan a competitor launching something that I want to look at market impact for, a huge customer request. You can't plan that, right? And so the idea is not a no, right? Because just saying no is makes it look like you're not a team player, makes it look like you don't prioritize what other priorities there are in the organization, and nobody likes to hear no. Sometimes it's not right now.
Right.
Sometimes it's yes, but like
Correct.
one of, as you said, one of these other things will have to go. And so I know that really early on in my work here, one of the things that I used to do was I used to submit a Google form to Ray with all the things that I was working on. And I was like, here's the list of like must do's, because if we stop doing them, like the lights will turn off. And then here's the list of other things that we've talked about. And here's the list of fun things, like checkbox 5, right? And like 5 of these will happen this week. And then it just kind of was like a really, what I think is good about it is, and it's great about the either like Jira or Trello or whatever mentality of it is, it's visual, right? And people need that visual reminder of here's the to-do list, here are the reminders, because it is like the engineering team, right? Like the engineering team can't do that. It's like, you know, we on the marketing and product side hear a request from a customer and we say, oh my God, build this feature right now. And then they say the same thing that we say back, which is, whoa, yeah, we could probably build that feature, but which one of these other things do you want us to stop building or working on or maintaining to make that happen? So Ray, I know that as Ray also heads the engineering side and has an engineering background, he probably has a lot of experience laughing and being like, yeah, we say this all the time, exact same situation. So applying it to marketing is great.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a great topic because one of the questions that I had for you, Bill, was what got you into thinking about this problem? Because I think it's this notion that you bring up of everyone is in reaction mode all the time, you know, and I think I think it's a symptom of a number of different things. I think one of the things that contributes to it the most is just there's so much information and so many things that we have to deal with on a daily basis. We're being overwhelmed by Slack and email and, you know, social media and all the stuff that we think we have to do. And, you know, even if we build lists, you know, just figuring out that prioritization requires kind of like an abstract enough mindset to see the big picture, you know, and doing that at the executive level and then doing that, helping your team do that in whatever units they're supposed to be focusing on, and then assembling that it's one of the things that we certainly see at our company as you know, something that we're always trying to stay on top of, and it goes into just so many areas of prioritization. And we have a term that we use quite a bit in our company that we call agency, which is basically it's almost like seeing the problems that need to be fixed before someone else has to bring them up. And, you know, I know every one company has a lot of different ways of looking at this, but basically it's more of this idea of being proactive, but it almost feels like we need new words or new ways to think about this. Because if we just fall back to using management speak, like, you know, proactive or whatever, people, it's almost like ad blindness, right? We don't even understand what that means anymore because it's been beaten to death. So I'd love to hear like your story and your background into what got you thinking about these concepts, and how did you arrive in your discipline and just maybe in your life as well, like at that this sort of process-based, agile-based approach is the way to go to solve some of these issues?
Well, before I got into marketing, I'm sort of new to marketing, frankly, like 3 years basically, and I ran the P&L for our training services business. So it was my job to help customers develop their training courses for their customers. That's what some people hire us to do. And on the side, I was writing for the blog, the Service Rocket blog. You know, how do you do training for your customers better and how to be good at it? Okay, so I was doing that. And when I had a good idea, I would write the blog and it would get published. Okay, and then 2 weeks would go by, I wouldn't have any bright ideas. Our implementation consultant, so in other words, it wasn't predictable. And our implementation consultants were using Jira and boards so they could visually see all of their workload. And Aaron, going back to one of your points about having good ideas, like they had a backlog. Like every time someone had an idea, it went into the backlog. They made a list, and it grew like crazy. Which we could talk about that too. But Matt Dorr was one of our senior consultants, and I said to him, "Can you set that up for me?" And so within 2 hours, I had a Kanban board in Jira and a project, and so instantaneously, I had 4 columns, so I had a workflow instantly within 2 hours, and a flow diagram, a flow of all the work. So I knew that on the left-hand column, I had 10 ideas. or 10 tasks, which for me was 10 blog topics. And then I knew that there was nothing in progress because that column was blank. And I had one that was just published. So I had nothing in the middle. And all of a sudden it started to bother me. Like, I have nothing in progress. I'll never get a blog out next week. And so uh, that changed my life in terms of knowing what I'm going to work on next, and almost eliminating, and not, it wasn't perfect because I had 10 blogs in progress occasionally, never finished any of them, you know, so it's not perfect, but I instantly knew what was in progress, or when I didn't have progress, or when I had a bottleneck, right? If I put too many things in progress. So then you have to think about, well, how do you limit the work in progress? Because if you do 10 things at once, you can't do anything, right? You have to go back to this one at a time thing. So that's how I got started in it. And then it evolved further into moving into doing Scrum, which is there's a little more to that. But we had a marketing team of 7 people and we were all running Scrum, and that changed. We switched from a Kanban process to all Scrum, and every one of our marketing projects was run through that Scrum thing, which I basically document this in the book. The book is really written about how we did it and the mistakes we made and the reasons why we chose deliberately not to do certain parts of this or that. And that's how the book kind of came to be. But it was all because Matt Dorr made a Kanban board for me in Jira, like opened my eyes.
It's awesome. It's amazing what simple tools like that can really do to change someone's perspective.
One of the things that I want to touch on that I'm sure would be going through the minds of audience members, especially marketers, is a lot of marketers will say, well, if I take all this time to make my Jira boards, or use Trello or whatever it is to make all these boards, I've spent more time on the organizational or the writing down aspect of it than it would have taken me to actually do a lot of these tasks, right? And I think that that's kind of a common fear. And so one of the things that's important that Ray and I talk a lot about when we're talking about building our own workflows and elements of the platform is the idea of templated, repeatable task sets, and saying, hey, I know every week I have to write a blog post, and then I know that I have to get all the social sharing for the blog post done, or we've got to record on Friday, or do whatever it is, right? And so having that task and all subtasks or associated elements that go along with that, and interdependencies that are repeatable, I think is a really important step in there. And I also know that one of the things that I want to touch on a little bit too is 30 years ago, this was probably less of a problem. It's not that it wasn't a problem, but it was less of a problem. And I want to say that one of the reasons it was less of a problem was we were primarily print-based, either TV, radio, print, and those had longer submission lead times, right? So you couldn't print a newspaper ad today or in 10 minutes, right? Now I know you could tweet right now if you needed to. I know you could put that up on Facebook or LinkedIn or share that. I know you could write a blog post and publish. So user-generated content and self-publishing has really changed a lot of that expected urgency and timeline, which I think makes this concept of agile marketing or scrum-based marketing so much more important for helping people prioritize, because in their minds, anything is possible. And in our minds, the workflow is still the same.
Yes, that's interesting. You know, I never thought of it like that before. And I go back to if you're reacting like that because you can, and I can get a newsletter today if I had to, I guess the risk of that and why Agile is good is because the risk is you run out of ideas. So you might be very good for a week, and every day I get the right tweets out and it's great and the right image and I have brilliant ideas. But then Monday comes and you just sit at your desk and you go, what should I tweet today? And maybe you run out of ideas.
Or maybe you didn't run out of ideas, but maybe nothing ever really ties back to anything or isn't measurable because you didn't actually target it towards anything.
We have to measure things? Is that what you're saying?
They just don't mean anything in relationship to our company all the time.
That's right. And one of the benefits of a Scrum, let's just take Scrum as an example, is that you're doing a lot. And listen, I would rather just get stuff done than to spend 4 hours planning. And as a matter of fact, and I talk about this in the book, one of the hardest things I had to get over was the amount of time you need to spend either going through your backlog of ideas. Because, if you're really good at Scrum, you're always either adding to your backlog or you're grooming. It's a term called grooming your backlog. You're going through the ideas that you have, and scrolling up and down the list and looking at things and reordering them and prioritizing them and saying, oh, maybe we should pull this one up that we added 2 years ago and actually do it in the next sprint. So you move it up. You're constantly, and then when you go to a sprint planning meeting to plan out your entire weekly sprint or the 2-week sprint, you have to spend half a day. And you have to go through it as a team, make deliberate decisions, and I hated it. And I was the one that told our team we should do this. So I struggle with it. And one of the mistakes we made was spent not enough time on sprint planning. What we started to do, oh, just get him in the sprint, and at the end of the day, I'll click start the sprint. Then nobody really does it, and then we don't have a properly planned sprint. And then every time a new idea comes in during the sprint, we react to that, and then we have all these things we planned that we didn't even get to. And so I hate spending time on the planning too, and yet it was a huge mistake that we had to fix to make our Scrum way better and much more predictable.
For those of our audience members that aren't either privy to the engineering team side of things, because this is a lot of engineering tactic discussion that we're using and methodology that we're using to apply to marketing. Quickly define sprint and Scrum for folks, just so that they kind of get a quick idea of what exactly it is you're talking about.
Okay, sure. So Scrum is a methodology that's an agile methodology. So if someone says they're agile, you sort of have to ask clarifying questions. Now, there's lots of ways to be agile, which is to say pick a specific process or methodology. So Scrum is one. And there are several elements of Scrum. And you say it's an engineering thing, but if you really read up on Scrum, it's just a way of working. Yep. It's nothing more than that. There's nothing special about it. Just because fancy Scala developers use it doesn't mean anything. It's just like we just work a certain way. So for example, you have a backlog, and all that means it's a list of every idea you have. And the process that you do is every time you have an idea, you just put it in the backlog. In other words, if you're who's the guy that wrote the GTD, getting things done? Like, he talks about the place to put something. So you get it off your head and you have it in a place, and you always know where to go for it. The backlog is just a place you put all your ideas, and that could be 1,000 ideas over 6 months. Okay. The next part so that way you always know where all your ideas are, and it's always growing. Now, the second part of Scrum is the planning process. So let's go back. A sprint is a time-based period of work. It could be a week, it could be a month, and it shouldn't be too long and it shouldn't be too short. So let's just pretend for now that we decide, and you can decide anything you want, that we're going to decide to do a 1-week sprint. All that means is every week we plan what we're going to do that week as a team. And almost literally, we're only supposed to work on the things we put in the sprint. Everything else has to wait. And all those things that have to wait are in the backlog. Okay, so that's what a sprint is, the time bound. Now, before every sprint, we do a sprint planning meeting. So let's say Monday morning from 9 to 11, we spend 2 hours as a team, and we plan everything we're going to do between now and Friday at 5 o'clock. And we literally take the task, and in Jira or even in Trello, you would drag all those tasks into the sprint, into the next column. And we all agree, all three of us in this session now, we all agree, yes, I agree, we're going to do that, and we all agree. And the most important thing is the boss doesn't get to decide what goes in the sprint. No way ever. Only us individual workers decide that. Because if a marketing manager has to get the newsletter out by Friday, the marketing manager commits to doing it. And if the marketing manager can't do it because they have to do something else, they say, no, I can't commit to that. We'll leave it in the backlog and we'll get to it next time. And then you do the work. You start the sprint and you do the work and you go through your sprint. At the end of the sprint, so let's say Friday afternoon or the following Monday morning, you do what's called a retrospective, and you review how it went. And the team gets together and you say, how did it go? Do we finish all of our work? I mean, there's specific questions, but basically you're going to review the week, and you say to yourself, oh, I didn't get to all my tasks. I got in the way. I had things that our CEO told me to do something else, or I didn't plan that I was going to be gone all day Thursday. And so I planned too much work, right? So you learn from that. And every week you learn from that feedback. And when you plan your next sprint, you remember, oh, remember last week I forgot I was going to have a dentist appointment for 4 hours, so I better not plan that extra thing. So you plan one less thing for the following week, maybe. And so then you do it again. In every sprint, you plan the sprint, then you work on the sprint, and then you review how you did.
I think one of the things that I like best about that methodology, that's also great. It's great for a lot of reasons, but one of the things that I really like is it's a visual way to keep everybody accountable, but also to explain the cause and effect of workforce interruption. So if you plan out your sprint and you're like, here are the things that we committed to. And then what you do what I used to do when I did my retrospectives was go back and say, okay, what percentage of our sprint did we actually get through, right? And that's pretty common. And you say like 60, 70%, whatever, with like a certain percentage as acceptable. And, we're always aiming for 100%, but if we get to like 94%, most people would consider that great. But, I would basically then take the percentage of things, especially in the beginning, because in the beginning that percentage can be kind of large, right? Of stuff you didn't get done, because people will commit to too many things or forget that they have to be gone, or they will get pulled into other stuff and they won't have learned how to do the prioritization, push and pull yet. So in the beginning, let's say we only got to 60% of stuff done. I would analyze that 40% for a couple minutes and say, what of that 40%, what caused it, right? Was it overcommitment? Was it poor planning because you didn't realize you took a half day on Wednesday? Was it actually because people pulled you in other directions?
Right.
And if you break down that time and look at the reasons why, you can actually start to highlight in reporting to people further up the food chain and say, hey, this is where we're at with our sprints, and these are things that would have been done had we not been pulled in other directions. And we're not saying we can't do the things that you asked. What we are saying is the reason that these other things didn't get done was because this portion of the time was taken to do them. And I always want people to add those tasks that they get asked to do somewhere in there as well, right? And to portion out the time that it took them, because that's basically time away from sprint.
Yep. As a matter of fact, one exercise, and one of the fun things about Scrum is if someone comes to you to request work, you need to be trained in your brain that your first response is, that sounds like a great idea. We will put it in our backlog and we will get to that in the next sprint. Now,
maybe
as if that you can't always do that, but if your first reaction, at least if your mindset is that, you get in the habit of, that's great, we've planned out our work, I know what I'm doing today at lunch, that's not going to affect, it doesn't affect you as much because you have this answer. Now, if they say no, you have to do it because, right? At least now you can have that conversation and you have a basis to have the conversation, and you can negotiate and you can say, here, look at our sprint. Let's pull up Jira right now. The whole team has access to it. Let's look, see these things? What do you want me to stop doing? You can have that conversation. And I used to love to say to people, yeah, that's great. Well, I'll put it in the backlog right now and we'll get to it when we can.
One of the things I'll tell you that's my least favorite, and Ray, I know this is your least favorite thing too. Well, one of your least favorites, we have a list, but is basically when somebody asks you, if you come and say, hey, I need this done today, or hey, I want this task done, you don't give us anything, and they say, when do you want it done by? And then they look disappointed with whatever the answer is. It's your fault for asking when I want something open-endedly and expecting that I'm going to pick the time that would have worked with whatever else you were working on. Never ask somebody, when do you want this? Don't ask. Say, hey, I'm currently in a sprint right now, and I can look at the next sprint to see where it fits in there and get back to you, and let them say, actually, I need it now, or actually this, right? It's incumbent on them to push back and to have a conversation about prioritization. But if you open-endedly ask someone when they want something, who's not going to be like now or as soon as possible, right? Because everybody wants things now.
And you're sort of letting them decide for you what your life is going to be like today instead of you deciding. And in a way, that's what Scrum is really good at. The individual team member decides what they work on and nobody else. In fact, in real Scrum, there's a role called a Scrum Master. It's actually a term. And people get certified in Scrum Master, which, by the way, I'm an uncertified Scrum Master, just so you know. But the Scrum Master is supposed to protect the process and protect the team. And the Scrum Master is supposed to get in front of the VP of whatever and say, no, 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 go away. We're in our sprint. Get out of here. And now, of course, in the real world, we negotiate things, which is what you're talking about. But we should lead and say, okay, I will tell you when we're going to get that done. We're going to put it in the backlog. And we're going to our next sprint planning meeting is Monday, and we'll work it into our next sprint. And that's when we'll do it. And then you negotiate with them, like you say, right? But this process gives you the power as an individual contributor to even say to an executive team member, no, even though we can't always say no to the chief marketing officer because of who she is or who he is. But I find that an executive will respect that you have a process. Not all executives are unreasonable people that just want stuff done because they said so. In the real world, some are, sure, but not really. And they will respect that you have a process. You say, sorry, we're 3 days into our sprint. I'll put that in the backlog. I'll get right back to you.
And I talk about this a lot, is that essentially if you just go tell somebody to do something and they don't act like they were doing anything else, I just wonder, were you even working on anything before I messaged you, right? Good
point.
Like, there's actually kind of a weird thing if you really think about it. If every time I call somebody up and say, hey, I need you to do this, and they do it in an hour, I'm like, so what else were you doing?
That's right. Yeah, it's scary to say to the chief marketing officer no, right? Because I could be fired at any moment. Maybe I'm worried about that. But if I have this process and we are getting good at it because we've done it for a while, my confidence goes up, and I can speak with an executive team member and I can say, I'm going to repeat myself. Yeah, that's great. Our sprint's almost over. We'll get that into the backlog and we'll plan it out in the next sprint. No problem. Thank you. I'll tell you when it's done. And now you're in charge, not the CMO, in a way.
It's also a great way to go back and look and review the things that you've accomplished and the traction and things that you've done. And I think for a lot of us, when we're in that in the moment, kind of like flying by the seat of our pants situation, it's really hard to keep track of everything you've worked on. So if somebody comes to you and says, what did you do this week? Or, hey, this month, why didn't we get this done? It's really hard to remember your days and all the things you did because you were just like so responsive, response-based that it feels like a jumble because every day feels like a jumble.
That's what's good about Jira because, every time you close out a sprint, Jira produces the report that shows you what was completed and what was not completed. And that's all archived in there. So you can go back to any sprint and find out which tasks were completed and which were not. And you can have that conversation. Just pull up the report in Jira. It's very easy. So you always know what you worked on 6 months ago because it's in there. Now, most of us just move on with our lives, go on to the next thing, of course, but it's in there. We can have that conversation. And so if an executive says, why wasn't this done? Or when did that get done? That's discoverable quite easily once you get good at it. I mean, you have to learn how to use Jira the right way. And okay, it's a new habit, but it's all there. That's what's good about these sprints. It time bounds and it sort of documents your work in many ways.
Well, what's awesome about Found Friday is that we do this every week, and like a sprint, it's a repeatable situation. Yeah. And we talk about something different every week, but what I will mention is that Bill is actually joining us for Found Conference. This time it's in Columbus, Ohio in September. We've also got one in Tokyo if you'd like to take a trip again this year. But we do it, kind of around the country, and the format's a little interesting. And I'll just let everybody that's listening know the format because it's not like a normal conference. What it does is we take 10 topics that are really important to the industry, and each topic gets 3 kind of topic experts, and each one of those people gets 5 minutes and 3 slides to make a point about their specific topic. And then the audience, which we purposefully keep small, which is why we move it to different locations so that a bunch of people can try to participate, is that then they get 15 minutes to basically have a debate, a discussion, bring up ideas. And so it becomes a 30-minute conversation between our 3 topic experts and our audience about the topic. And then our speakers for each topic become part of the audience and get to do the exact same thing with all the other speakers. So there are 30 speakers in all, and they kind of trade in and out as audience members and panel experts. And then there's a lot of interactivity in there. And so if you've ever been to a conference where you were one of like 3,000 to 5,000 people in a big stadium style audience, and the person was talking about things and you really wanted to ask questions, but there was no way. And then the lineup at the stage was 10 people long, and you were like, there's no way I'm ever going to get up there to talk to them. This isn't that way. And we do have people joining from all around the country. So like we said, Bill's flying in from Palo Alto. We've got folks in from all over the country. So we really encourage people to check that out. We're also going to try to live stream it. So if you can't make it here in person, we still want you to be able to have access. And with that, we are at time today. But I always want everybody to give some closing remarks and give everybody one thing that you think that they should take away and remember from, or one thing that they might want to try to implement from today's conversation. So Bill, we'll start with you.
Okay, well, I am terrified by this Gartner stat that by 2020, the content will be the #1 bottleneck in a marketing team. And if we don't get process right, and it's no wonder Netflix is spending $9 billion to produce content. Right? Like, you can't just do that. So if that's going to be our #1 problem in 3 or 5 years, we have to get process right. So one action, I want everyone who's listening to read up on Agile, Scrum, and Kanban. There are blog posts on this, like how to pick between Scrum and Kanban, and just make a decision on, yes, I think we should do this and we should eventually pick one, or no, this is not for me. I'm going to stick with my sticky notes.
Ray, go for it.
This is again another one that would be a great whole show. I totally agree with you on the content production being the bottleneck in this area. I think that adopting some sort of methodology around this is really important. So you're one of the few marketers that I've heard talk to about applying Agile methodology to marketing in general. This is obviously much more of an engineering topic, and I love the fact that that is starting to come out there more. I think one of the other big challenges is scaling. Inevitably, you're going to have someone with more of the ideas for each topic, and scaling out the way you get their ideas out of their head into the talent pool, and deciding where you have that talent sourced. Are you hiring people? Are you working with third-party contractors or agencies? I think really getting a handle around that is critical for people. And I think that I do like this idea of bringing a Scrum type methodology to that. I think also there is a need for basically defining that at the company level. What is the process? Who are the creative minds coming up with topics and using that combination of data and their own ideas, and then taking that, turning that into workable outlines, and then making sure that the actual content is created. I think if you can solve both of those problems in conjunction, you have a shot at it of really kind of alleviating some of these problems with this bottleneck.
Yeah, and I'll tell you guys, like, the thing that I'll ask folks to do, if trying to pick a methodology sounds scary, or if a lot of this feels a little overwhelming, then maybe the first step to do next week as your takeaway is to, whether you do it as like a little tally mark on a notepad or you keep track of it somehow, make a note of every time you get distracted away from the thing that you're working on, or the task that you're supposed to be doing, or get assigned something different than what you started out to do, or walked into work and realized, I don't have a good idea for what to do right now, right? And by the end of the week, if you tally those up and you have less than 5, then you're doing awesome, and, like, good on you for being, a crazy, amazing person who's managed to internalize a workflow process, right? But if you've got multiple times where somebody's either pulled you off a project, you couldn't think of exactly what to write about or what to do next, because a lot of it's like what to write about next, right? So if you couldn't figure that out, or if you got distracted away from something to do something else, or pulled off of a task, just keep track of those over the course of the week and just see what happens. And I think that will potentially be the proof positive of why we're having this conversation today, why this topic is so important for folks inside the workforce. So I would say, if the rest of it seems scary, start there, because what should be scary is the amount of time that you're probably getting misused during your work week. And if you're not, if you're in the managerial or executive layer, try to keep yourself accountable and do this too, right? Like, tick down every time you actually come up with a brand new idea and like want to tell somebody about it, tell them to go do it, or keep track of every time you have a great idea, and don't end up writing it down somewhere and think that you'll think about it later, but then it gets shoved down based on other things. And had you added it to your Trello board or to your Jira, box of things, like, you just really think about how many times that happens. And I think if we start with the accountability aspect from there, the rest of it will make more sense as to why it's such a good idea.
Can I offer a bonus tip?
Yes, do it.
Okay. So,
all right, folks, it's going to be so expensive. Bonus tip.
Okay, yeah, this is at cost is extra 25 cents. So I think that what you could do today, you could be doing Scrum in 20 minutes. Pick a project that you have, and I say you're working on a newsletter. Take this get a whiteboard and sticky notes, and do 3 columns: to do, in progress, and done. Just for your next newsletter. Get a sticky note for every task for that newsletter. A sticky note for get the graphics, a sticky note for write the headlines, a sticky note for set up the template in HubSpot, a sticky note, all of them. And then plan out the ones you're going to do that week. You might just create the template in HubSpot that week. So just put one into the in progress column and work on that week. And then every week, just move the sticky notes over for the ones you're going to work on that week until you move them over to they're done. And by the time the newsletter goes out, all of your sticky notes will be in the done column, and you've just done Scrum.
And hopefully what you've seen is things either move faster or slower than you originally thought they would, and you've got a super visual reminder of why did it move so quick or so slow.
Or you're going to put all these stuff in progress, and you're going to realize you can't get to them all, and you're going to get to Friday, and you're going to say, oh my gosh, we still have 10 things in the improv. We didn't even do them. We're not done yet. And you're going to realize, oh, I guess planning matters. Okay. So,
and on Friday, when you feel like you're going to be sick, please call Bill, not us.
That's correct. And that's sticky notes. No technology required.
Or come to Found Conference and bug Bill in person. We welcome you either way. But thank you so much. And Bill, we'll definitely have you back on again. It's been great talking to you. We'll probably have you back on after Found Conference sometime in the months following that for a quick recap of that conversation. And we really look forward to it. And with that, we wrap up until next week. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.